One will pause for thought. Did the daughters emigrate to Australia and the mother stay behind? There is some evidence to suggest that, or the mother came back. But also, if Jacqueline divorced my father, then his way was clear to marry anyone he wanted after that, legally. And yet, when I persuaded him to marry my mother in 1978, 7 years later, my mother was actually horrified. I thought I was doing her a favour. I thought I was making her more secure. She was a nervous wreck, for God's sake. And a common law wife at that time had no legal rights at all. My father could have just said to her, get out on the streets, and she'd have had no comeback. So I thought I was guaranteeing her security by saying, marry her or I spill the beans. I was young and naive. My mother reacted with fury. You don't know what you're doing. Well, she could have tried telling me. It would have helped enormously. But she was right. I didn't know what I was doing. Because the first time that my father down nearly killed her was 2 years later. She was in intensive care for a considerable period. And when my father persuaded me to go and visit her there late at night, allegedly by her request, which I thought odd, but I did what my father said. We all did, I think. When we visited her in intensive care, she was visibly very frightened, and she couldn't talk, but she could gesticulate. And I think my father went off to the gents or something, and she was saying, and I said, do you want us to go? Yeah, she wanted us to go. She had not wanted us to visit. She did not want my father anywhere near her. And all of that came up when I found a diary that I had kept meticulously at the time and then forgotten. I think the reason that that marriage was such a terrible mistake was precisely that my father was free and clear to marry her, and the marriage was legally binding. That was why it was not a good idea. It meant, for example, that when my mother died, my father could sell the house. And I have already said what happened 11 months, I may not have said 11 months, after her death. He did sell the house. He said for a song. It was sold, he said, for at least 20 or 30,000 less than it was worth. At least. And he moved into a flat around the corner from me, close to my daughters and close to Ellen. Ellen, I suspect, had been another woman long before I knew of her. I was extremely fond of Ellen. I got on with her very, very well. And we became good friends. I was happy to call her, as I do, stepmother. Although they didn't marry. And although he was with her by the Easter at the latest, following my mother's death at the Christmas. Despite the rapidity of that, and perhaps not expecting to like Ellen, I liked her very much. And I still do. I'm still fond of her. Well, she's now deceased, but I still have very fond memories of her. However, I think that they had known each other for a very long time prior to my knowing of her existence. I know, in fact, I know it. I think on one occasion her conscience got to her. She didn't tell me outright, it has to be said. She said she had once had an affair. Her husband was deceased. He died in 88. She told me that she'd once had an affair with a driving instructor in his 30s. And I got the impression it wasn't very long ago. And as Ellen at that time was in her 59 when I met her. And I don't know how old, probably about my age when she confessed this to me. I must admit, I thought, why would a man in his 30s, but never mind. Some men like older women. A lot of men like older women, actually. My father taught Ellen to drive. I think in a roundabout way. What Ellen was telling me was that she had had an affair with my father when he was in his 30s. And that is by no means impossible. She was living in Maidstone at that time, and he was living in Gillingham, not very far away, Gillingham, Kent. He always had women lined up, here, there, and everywhere, one way or another. And my mother had been a sort of tucked away security blanket, I think. Wrong word, but the one he could always go back to. The one who could be tucked away for 30 years or so in Southampton. 1958 to 1989. And wouldn't complain and would just wait for him wherever he was. But being married to her was never ever in his plans. No. And from the moment that marriage took place, my mother's number was up.